Hello and welcome back to the second episode of When They Say, You Say. I'm Olivia Gans Turner, your hostess, and I'm thrilled that you joined us again for the second installment of this, what we hope is very valuable and very important pro-life series here on EWTN. I think that all of us who were together on our first episode learned a few lessons. I know I did. I learned that one of the things that I have to do is make sure I'm hearing you. So before this episode is out, I'm going to listen to a couple of your hard questions and we're going to answer them. But let's start with the beginning and the basics before we get to that exciting part of the program. I know that all of us who are concerned about the pro-life issue realize that the centerpiece of the whole conversation is the unborn child. But when I spoke to you yesterday, I mentioned that there are 5 basic arguments. And the first of those arguments that often gets thrown our way in any setting that we as people concerned about life are addressing, private, public, wherever we are, is the number 1 argument. It's not a baby, it's a blob of tissue. Now, what I want you to understand is that when we talk about this issue, there are a variety of ways you might hear that argument made. You might hear somebody say something like, oh, well, you know, you have your point of view and I have mine, and maybe your church teaches you that, but I don't believe what your church teaches. So it's not really a baby if I don't think it is. Or we might hear somebody say something like, well, you know, I mean, really, these days, with all the technology to do different things before people are even born, manipulation of the human genome, etc., how do we really know that this is a baby? How can we even verify that? The only thing we actually do know is that there is a potential life in the womb, something that might grow into a human being like the rest of us. And you hear these various kinds of arguments. They're all basically the same effort made within our society to dehumanize the baby, to strip from this member of the human family their very precious and very beautiful and irreplaceable value and quality within our society. Now, many of you understand this as a religious issue. Many of you do. There are maybe some watching who do not. The reality is the truth of unborn life can be rested in science. We can base our conversation on the scientific facts of life in the womb. For instance, did you all know that your heart was beating at 18 to 20 days after you were conceived in your mother's womb? Before she even actually knew you were there, in many cases, you already had a beating heart, as does every unborn child. In fact, every abortion stops a beating heart because no abortion can be performed before the baby has a beating heart. The earliest type of abortion that can be performed in the United States now, probably in the world, is what we call chemical abortion, or RU486. And that chemical abortion cannot be performed until the baby has already had a beating heart for about 2 weeks. In fact, by the time the chemical abortion RU46 is performed, every one of us already had traceable brain waves, which are traceable by 5 to 6 weeks in the womb. So at 6 weeks, when the earliest form of abortion can be performed, you already had a beating heart and brain waves, as does every baby we're trying to save. That's a scientific fact. Now, for most of us, these facts register deeply at a level of humanity. For many folks, it still doesn't manage to create that level of humanity. There's a new conversation going on that discusses the unborn's capacity to feel pain. In fact, 10 states have passed laws called the Pain-Capable Unborn Child Protection Act that will prevent abortion in those states after the point in pregnancy at which the unborn child is capable of feeling pain. Now, science at this point measures pain for the unborn at about 20 weeks of the pregnancy. That's 5 months. That's very young, and it's actually 2 weeks before most babies who might be born preemie can actually survive. Although more and more babies are being born at 22 weeks, and one has even been proven to be born at 21 weeks and has survived. That's how amazing our technology is. These children are being born at younger and younger stages. In fact, I have an exquisite story to tell you about one particular little premature baby who's very close to my heart. 13 years ago, my beautiful niece Amelia was born. Mind you, I said 13 years ago, not last month, not last year. 13 years ago, she was born at 22 weeks. She was as big as your hand. She's now a healthy, beautiful 13-year-old going off to high school next year. Most people in America have no idea that children born at that stage of pregnancy, because of whatever complication may have been going on in their mother's pregnancy, can survive and are healthy. So these are facts about life in the womb that we have an obligation to bring to the conversation. By so doing, we give back the baby's face. We make them one of us, not a thing, not an object. Remember what I said yesterday in the show about the F word, fetus, which for many people means something disposable, perhaps even something frightening or ugly. For us, it should mean someone vulnerable, someone very fragile, someone very precious, a tiny, tiny, precious baby in their mother's womb. So when we talk about him, and we help people see that little baby boy's face in his mother's body, then we're beginning to have a conversation that expands the issue beyond rhetoric and to scientific fact. It is the ultimate human rights issue, and it can be based on science, and it can affect anyone regardless of their philosophical or religious perspective. So you can persuade anybody, whether they belong to your church or not. And that's your job, and that's my job too at National Right to Life. Now I want you to understand something that I realize. Abortion always fails the mother and the child. It fails them both because it constantly says that this is somehow necessary. And that's the second argument. That's the second part of this conversation. These two arguments, argument number one and argument number two, very often dovetail. I must tell you that when I'm doing a news program, let's say, perhaps I'm on CNN or the Nightline or on something on Fox News, all of which I've done. When I go on these programs, I'm often asked to come on and speak about a particular issue, maybe a Supreme Court decision, maybe a new piece of legislation that's going forward. Ultimately, the decision or the conversation steers back to these basic elemental questions of, is this a human being or not? And what about the mother's right to make this decision? So when we talk about the second argument, it's my body, my choice, then we have to remember that in reality, there is a decision being made. It's a life or death decision that this mother is making. It's a permanent decision. But we must speak with enormous compassion. The mothers and fathers that we're speaking to, and remember I said yesterday that one of the most powerful components of how we are reaching society now is affected by something quite remarkable to ponder on. And that is, because of the sheer volume of abortions that have happened in the United States today, it is impossible for any one of us watching this program right now to think that we don't know someone who's had an abortion. I've had one. I have 7 brothers and sisters. I have multiple nieces and nephews. I have cousins. I have extended in-law family. All of those people know me. I'm very public with my story. Most people know that I had an abortion in 1981. The people you're talking to may have never shared their secrets. So when you are talking to these folks, what you're thinking about is, how can I not only tell them the truth about abortion, but how can I do it in a way that is compassionate and comprehends that one of the walls I may be running into is a wall of grief, a wall of pain. I think that's the number one reason why many pro-lifers are having a hard time communicating on what should be intellectually just straight fact. This is an unborn child in the womb. We can prove it through science. There he is. There she is. But it's the damage that abortion's already done that is interfering more with our ability to communicate. But abortion is always a bad decision for the mothers too. The evidence is mounting. Associations and programs like the Association for Interdisciplinary Research in Values and Social Change, an organization made up of academics, researchers, statisticians, has since 1985 been compiling data and evidence about how damaging abortion really is on the psychological and physical well-being of mothers after abortion. So for all of us, we need to know some of those facts and figures. And you can go to National Right to Life's website, nrlc.org, and get more of that information, because it is important for you to realize when you're talking to many people now, you're talking through the pain. So the more you understand about the effect of abortion on mothers and how women's lives have been permanently altered by a decision that ended their children's life, the better off you'll be when you handle that question. Now, From my point of view, abortion is always a bad response to very real problems. The pro-life movement has understood for many years that when society says women need abortion, this so-called war on women, that laws are taking away access to abortion, what we're avoiding is the phenomenon of what are women really looking for? What is it that they really need when they're facing a pregnancy? Being pregnant isn't the problem. It's the circumstances surrounding that pregnancy. The baby is not the problem. I mean, the unborn child is not at issue here. The unborn child didn't cause the reasons why the pregnancy is difficult. Perhaps she has no support system from the baby's father. Perhaps she's very young and is afraid to tell her parents. Perhaps she has a boss who's threatened to fire her if she's pregnant. Perhaps she is dealing with health problems that make being pregnant complicated. These are real problems. The baby is not the cause of those problems. So abortion, from our point of view, all of us speaking to our friends, is a bad response to real problems. Women need life-affirming responses. Opportunities to get the kind of support and help that respects their intelligence and their personal strength to deal with even the most complicated of pregnancies. That's why the pro-life movement from the beginning, and this is something you would share with your friends and neighbors as you speak about this issue, make sure you know this little fact. There are over 3,000 mother helping centers throughout the United States dedicated with free of charge to providing assistance to mothers in crisis. This is something most people we talk to on a daily basis know nothing about. They have no idea that in every community across the United States and in many parts of the world abroad, there are people dedicating their lives, their time, their talents, and their abilities to providing the kind of life-affirming answers that protect mother and child, that respect them both equally, and require, as we do at National Right to Life, that they will ultimately be protected under the law equally. This isn't a question of pitting mother against child. So these two arguments of it's a blob of tissue, not a baby, and it's a woman's choice, and the government should stay out of it, are all negative and inappropriate and smoke screens to the reality of what is going on in every abortion. Every abortion ends a baby's life and leaves a mother scarred, either emotionally, spiritually, or physically. These are things you can educate your friends on. This is what you can do to make a difference in communicating on life issues. Sometimes just bringing forward this kind of information, that the risk of breast cancer after abortion is 5 times greater for women who abort in their first pregnancy. A little fact like that can begin an entirely new conversation. So as you begin those conversations, remember to listen. You may be hearing somebody who really needs to tell you, I can't hear what you're saying because I had an abortion, or I know my daughter had an abortion, or my sister-in-law had an abortion, and I love her. And what you're telling me about this unborn child makes me question how I feel about my sister-in-law's decision. But I love her. How can I help her? What do I need to do? So listen as you speak with people, and you will understand what you can do to resolve their hurt. So we're about to go to break, but after we come back from the break, we're going to take a little time to play with some of those questions that I know many of you have already heard. I can't wait to see you here. I'm glad you came back. Glad to have you here in our second part of the second show of When They Say, You Say. Now, we were talking in the first part of the program today about the 2 first arguments, probably the most common arguments that folks run into when they try to talk about abortion either in a public setting or with their friends and family. The idea that baby's not a baby, it's just a blob of tissue, and all of the variations that spring from that idea. And the other argument that this decision is always a private one between a woman and her doctor, that it's the woman's choice and only her choice. And of course we talked about the fact that science proves completely that this is not a part of a woman's body that we're talking about, that this unborn child is a unique and genetically completely separate human being, that everything about this human being from the beginning of their life at fertilization is defined. Their potential height, their sex, their color of their skin, everything about who we are, even where we might gain weight in the future, all of that is already a part of our genetic makeup at the moment of our conception or fertilization. So that's number one. And number two is that other part of the equation, that this is a woman's decision and only hers. But of course, what we aren't listening to in that kind of rhetoric is how much our society is negating the desire of most women to actually find a life-affirming option that will protect them and save their babies' lives. In my experience working with women after abortion, I can tell you with absolute sincerity, I have been on one hand, I could probably count on one hand, the number of women who I authentically believe really thought that the abortion was a good and positive experience. And that's after speaking in 50 states and 17 countries outside the U.S. Abortion never makes us feel happy about ourselves or stronger. It just leaves damage. So we know that there are better answers than abortion to these situations. Now, we've talked about the crisis pregnancy centers, how in fact these services, the pregnancy resource centers, the mother helping centers, are establishing a lifeline to many women who would otherwise find themselves alone and pressured by Planned Parenthood and other abortion programmers and providers and all of these individuals who are completely involved in the industry of abortion. We know they're out to hurt us. So we are looking for other ways that make a difference. I mean, the bottom line is really, abortion hurts. We know that abortion hurts babies because unborn babies can feel pain at 20 weeks in the womb. We know that abortion hurts women because it leaves them either emotionally, physically, or spiritually scarred. We know that abortion hurts. So, I want to take a few minutes at the end of the program each time, during the series actually, to look at some of the questions many of you have heard. There's a lot of ways these questions come up, a lot of things that pop up here and there. What we'll do is we'll take one or two of them, and at each episode, we'll break them apart and let you see how I believe you can answer successfully and reasonably on virtually anything that comes up, however it's phrased. Let's start with a big one for most of us.
You have your own religious beliefs, and I have mine. So why do you feel like it's okay for you to force your beliefs on me or any woman?
This is one of the ways that I would respond to that. I appreciate your beliefs, and I appreciate that you respect mine, but I don't form my opinion on this issue and my perspective on how it should be handled in our culture based solely on anybody's religious beliefs or philosophy. This issue actually, for many of us, transcends religion or philosophy because it can be so rooted in science. We know through scientific discovery that each one of us had a beating heart at 18 days after conception. We know that each one of us had brain waves at 6 weeks before virtually any abortion can be performed in the United States of America. We know that babies can feel pain in the womb at 20 weeks. And we know that this is genetically and scientifically a separate human being. No baby boy can ever be part of a woman's body, period. It's a physical impossibility. So this is someone, and I invite you to step outside of your preconceived notions and work with me to find responses that will protect this human being under the law and within our culture in ways that are respectful and life-giving, both to mother and child. That's question number one. Now, I'm not trying to insult anyone watching this program who takes their pro-life view from their own perspective and their own religious background. That is perfectly fine and appropriate. But most of the time, you're talking to people who may have no concept of that experience. So it's necessary for us to be able to speak about things that transcend what we have grown up with or what we may know or live in our daily experience. So reaching outside of our comfort zone sometimes brings somebody else into a comfort zone. That's my point with that answer. Here's another one for you.
The fetus can't live outside of the woman's body, so it's not meaningful life. It's just potential life.
Let's remember that this woman is carrying someone that we've already scientifically proven is a member of the human family. So now we have to deal with two individuals. And how we are going to provide for those two individuals is the critical component of the work that we're doing as pro-lifers. And hopefully many of you listening might actually be involved in the pregnancy resource centers. So discussing with folks how you would handle that is a very important part of that answer. Here's another big one.
The woman should be allowed to decide when the fetus is a human being. The government should not be involved in this question. It's not the role or the place of politicians to decide these things.
It's not the role or the place of politicians to decide these things. In a civilized society, we do expect our lawmakers to provide protection under the law for the vulnerable within our society, most particularly protecting our right to life. The debate that we are dealing with does ask the question, is human life worthy of protection from the very beginning? Because if it is not, then all of our lives are at risk. Any one of us could find our right to life challenged because of our age, our health, or our circumstances. When people speak to me about this question and use that rhetoric and that language, framing that's a category number 2 question, by the way, and argument number 2, it's a woman's body, therefore it should all be her decision. If we leave it up to other individuals to decide who among us is human, we will find ourselves facing things that we have faced in our country's history, where one class of human beings had the power and authority to decide that another class of human beings was not human enough to be protected under the law. That is not a course of direction that we want to continue down again. And for that reason, the government must be responsible to provide protection for the unborn and that child's mother to the fullest extent of the law. They are not unequal in the discussion. They are equals, deserving protection both under the law. So what you're dealing with are questions that universally pull out red herrings, things that make you go, oh, gee, that's completely not common sense. Why are you even talking about it? But something behind the questioner needs to be responded to. They need to be heard. They either are looking for some kind of independence or freedom or lack of responsibility. All of that is our responsibility to address. Another great big red herring. Another red herring is a question that I like to call the fishy one.
Baby, this fetus in the womb doesn't even look like a baby. It looks like a fish or some kind of weird creature. Everybody knows human life begins at birth. Why do you people persist in being so unscientific?
It always comes down to this. Go back to basics. Whenever you're not sure how to respond, go back to basics. Go back to basics, go back to basics. For us, it's always about finding ways to tell people the truths that we know. Everything we've talked about in this episode, that the baby has a beating heart, that the baby is genetically separate from the mother of that child. All of these things must be brought out again and again and again. And then ultimately, sometimes you just have to say to folks, I hope you'll pick up a biology book, because truly, clearly you're not up to speed on where science has taken us in the last 2 decades on knowledge and wisdom about life in the womb. There's so much more for you to learn. I hope I can introduce you to some of that. I think people are sometimes reaching for ways to avoid the truth. And sometimes when I'm dealing with certain individuals in certain settings, I must confess that I will be a little bit playful, shall we say, and just kind of go, come on, you and I both know there's no common sense behind that. I do advise you to carry a picture of the unborn. Preferably, please, no pictures of aborted babies. I really strongly urge you to remember that the point of our whole operation and our whole raison d'etre for this entire experience together is to learn to invite people into the movement, not to push them away. And since we've discussed the fact that so many people have been wounded by abortion in our culture, it is my experience that the pictures of the babies who have been aborted very often create a wall of fear or antagonism from those who are wounded in the conversation. Meanwhile, why not show the pictures of the beautiful creation of life? We have so many pictures now of these exquisite children living their lives beautifully in the womb, learning to suck their thumbs in their mother's body, learning to kick, moving, even smiling. There's a beautiful 4G image out there of a baby smiling. This is our truth. This is life waiting to be protected and to live. We know that the decision will lead to death, but in a society that is so immersed in it, let us be the face of life. Bring the face of this living, beautiful child to your listeners. Bring a voice of real downright compassion and caring to the mother who may be talking to you, or the brother, or the friend, or the father who challenges you on your position. Remembering that always your position is one of hopefulness and communication. Now, I want to have opportunities where you can continue to learn. Everyone has different experiences. You'll bring your own experiences to the whole conversation. Don't be afraid of that. Obviously, I use my experiences quite a bit when I'm talking about these issues. You'll have experiences. Figure that out for yourself. Use what you feel is appropriate. Find ways to communicate that mean something to you without hurting, without pushing away, without creating fear or antagonism. Now, bottom line is this. When we are working with each other, there will be times when we get frustrated. But remembering that we're dealing with truth will always create an opportunity to go back to the beginning and start again if need be. Now, I want to ask all of you if you'll do me a favor. I want you to come back tomorrow and we'll talk more about the next big issue that I think is a big stumbling block for many of us. Join us again on the next episode of When They Say, You Say, and I look forward to hearing your responses as you email us.